وعلى نبينا محمد وعلى آله وأصحابه أجمعين. اللهم فقهنا في الدين وعلمنا التأويل يا رب العالمين. Today we will start the conditions of Salah. So yesterday we covered the chapter of the Adhan and the Iqamah, and after that the next chapter the author has written in his book is called Bab Shara'it as-Salah, the chapter of the conditions of Salah. قال المصنف ابن قدامة المقدسي رحمه الله: وهي 9 أحدها الطهارة من الحدث لقول رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم لا صلاة لمن أحدث حتى يتوضأ. The author rahimahumullah, he says there are 6 conditions of Salah. There are 6. The first one is الطهارة من الحدث, being pure from al-hadath. And tahara, as we've studied before in the previous chapters, is of 2 types. Tahara from hadath al-asghar, which would be wudu, from the minor impurity, and tahara, purity or cleanliness, from the major impurity, from al-hadath al-akbar, which would be ghusl. And we need both of them, ghusl and wudu, for salah. As the Prophet ﷺ said, لا صلاة لمن أحدث حتى يتوضأ. There is no salah, the prayer is not valid for the one who does not have ritual impurity, who does hadath. Hadath is anything that breaks your wudu. Liman ahdath, whoever has an ahdath, whoever does something to break your wudu until he makes wudu. And we've studied this extensively in the previous chapters. الثاني, the second condition is al-waqt, dukhul al-waqt, the time or the commencement of the time for prayer. And in this part he will discuss all of the different times for the different salawat. وَوَقْتُ الظُّهْرِ من الزوال الشمس إلى أن يصير ظل كل شيء مثله. And the time for dhuhr is from the zawal, from the zenith of the sun until the sun reaches, or until the object reaches, its shadow reaches the same length as the shadow itself. So the time of noon or dhuhr is from the time when the sun reaches its zenith. So the zenith is the highest point where the sun will rise to. It is noon, right? So if we imagine that we imagine that the sun, there is a horizon, right? And coming up from the horizon, the sun will rise. It will continue to rise, and it gets to a peak, a point where it will not go higher anymore, and that is called the zenith. As soon as it tips over to go to the west, then that will be considered the starting of the prayer of dhuhr. Now, when the sun is at the highest point, there is either no shadow for an object. So if we put a ruler up, for example, a 30-centimeter ruler up, we will see no shadow or very little shadow, depending on where you are in the world. They say by the equator there is no shadow, and if you are anywhere further or if above or below the equator, then there will be a small, slight shadow. So that shadow at the zenith, at the highest point, it will be very small, very minute. Maybe it'll be 3 centimeters or 2 centimeters for a 30-centimeter ruler. So whatever that is, we add that to the amount of the ruler. So for example, when the ruler starts to when it starts to tip, so when it starts to go over, so when you see so for example from 3 centimeters you see it going to 4 centimeters, so it will so to start over, when the sun is rising, the object, it will start increasing. It'll start from nothing, when there's no sun, and then it will increase 1 centimeter, 2 centimeter, 3, 4, until it gets to a high point, and then it'll start decreasing again, and then there will remain either a very minute amount or zero shadow. Once it comes back from that minute amount, so say the least amount is 3 centimeters, then it starts going to 4 centimeters, then it will start, then the time for dhuhr will come in. So once it goes to the lowest point of once the object, its shadow goes to the lowest amount, and then it starts to increase again, that will be the time for dhuhr. That is how we can tell the time for dhuhr, because obviously we cannot look at the sun and say that it's in the middle or it's in the center, etc. We won't be able to tell that from our own eyes, but that is how we can tell when the object starts gaining more after going to its lowest point in its shadow, when it's directly in front of the sun. وَوَقْتُ الْعَصْرِ, and the time of Asr, وَهِيَ الْوُسْطَى من آخر وقت الظهر إلى أن تصفر الشمس ثم يذهب وقت الاختيار. And the time for so the time for, so we said the time for the beginning of dhuhr. When does the time for dhuhr end? The time for dhuhr ends when the shadow is the equal length of itself. So for example, we're talking about a 30 centimeter object. Now we said that at the beginning there was 3 centimeters, right? At the beginning, when the zenith is when it's at the point of zenith, we said, let's say that there's 3 centimeters, right, of a shadow. Now this object is 30 centimeters. So when it's reached 33 centimeters, so its length plus that amount that it was at the zenith, when it reaches that is when the salat time for dhuhr is over, and that is when the time for asr comes in. So that is when the time for asr will come in. As soon as the object has reached its length plus the amount that it was at the time of az-zawal, or the zenith. And the salat al-asr is considered al-wusta, which is the middle prayer. And you notice how the author, he started off with dhuhr, because the first prayer in the day is salat al-dhuhr, and the last prayer is considered salat al-fajr, because fajr is considered to be in the night. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَحَافِظُوا عَلَى الصَّلَوَاتِ وَالصَّلَاةِ الْوُسْطَى, right? And this is there's a special preference to salat al-wusta, which is the asr salah. It is one of the best prayers. It is considered the best prayer out of all of the 5 salawat. So the author says, وَهِيَ الْوُسْطَى مِنْ آخِرِ وَقْتِ الظُّهْرِ. So it starts from the ending time of dhuhr إِلَى أَن تَصْفَرَّ الشَّمْسِ, until when the sun becomes yellow. And the meaning of this is that when the sun becomes yellow and you're able to see the yellowness of the sun on the walls and around you, and you're able to look at the sun without any irritation from your eyes. So that is how you know when the sun is it is become yellowish kind of color, right? During the noon time, if you look at the sun, you won't be able to look at it. It will irritate your eyes. You'll want to look away. But there is a point when the sun it becomes cooler. It comes down more, and you're able to look at the sun directly. And at that time is the ending time of, or it is the end of the time of Asr, which is the ikhtiyari time, which is the preferable time. So for Asr, there are 2 times: the preferable time, and then the time of karaha or makruh. Then from that time, from when the sun becomes yellowish, until Maghrib time, until the sun sets, that will be the time when the Asr Salah is makruh, or it is disliked to pray, except if you have a valid reason. ويبقى وقت الضرورة إلى غروب الشمس ووقت الغروب من غروب إلى أن يغيب الشفق الأحمر. So the time for Asr, which is the makruh time, will remain from when the sun turns yellow until the sunset. And the time for the sunset prayer, the time for Maghrib, will be until when the sun sets, until the red color of the sun disappears. So if we have a horizon, the sun sets, the sun will disappear from the horizon. Now, when the sun sets, there is still the light from the sun, which we'll see. We'll see a yellowish, a reddish, and orangish light. As soon as the sun sets, then that is the time for Maghrib, right? But it's still going to be bright because we can see the effects of the sun. And as long as it is bright and we can see the effects of the sun, we can see the brightness, we can see the redness of the sun, that is the time for Maghrib. When all of that becomes dark and we cannot see any remnants of the sun anymore, that is when the time for Isha starts. ووقت العشاء من ذلك إلى نصف الليل ويبقى وقت الضرورة إلى طلوع الفجر الثاني. And the author says that so when the disappearing of the red color for the sunset, it disappears. So when the red color of the sunset disappears, the time of Isha has started from that time until the middle of the night. So the time for Isha starts when there is no light anymore until the middle of the night. And the middle of the night is calculated from the time of Maghrib and the time of Fajr. You take these two times and you divide how many hours there are in between, and you see what the middle of the night is. It is not necessarily 12 o'clock, and most likely it's not 12 o'clock, midnight. It will be between Maghrib and Isha. You look at how many hours there are and you divide by 2, and that is how you get the middle of the night. The same calculation or the same method you'll use to find the last third of the night. We know that the last third of the night is when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala comes down, and it is the best time to pray Salah Qiyam al-Layl. Same thing, you take from Maghrib to Fajr and you divide it by 3 and you look at the last third of the night, and that will be the starting of the last third of the night. ووقت الفجر من ذلك إلى طلوع الشمس. Okay, for the Isha prayer, we said that the time is from when there is no light, until half of the night. What about the last half of the night? Is it permissible to pray or not? And this is considered waqt al-daruri. It is considered the waqt, the time of necessity, or the time that it is makruh to pray at that time. We are not supposed to be praying at that time unless there is some sort of necessity that necessitates us to pray after half of the night. And the time of Fajr min dhalika ila tulu' ash-shams. And the time of Fajr will be from the rising of the sun until or from the dawn. ووقت الفجر. And the time of Fajr is from then until the sunrise. So the Fajr is what the scholars consider the second dawn. So there are usually two dawns, or they're referred to as the false dawn and the true dawn. And this is, we said that if we have the horizon and the sun starts to come, if the sun is before the horizon, when it approaches the horizon, there is some light that will come out. Once we see that light and it takes over the sky, and usually the scholars, they describe it as a horizontal line. So it starts horizontally and it takes over the entire sky. And once it starts, it doesn't stop. There is something called the false dawn. And the false dawn is usually a vertical line, and it will come and it will go. It will not be consistent. The true dawn will start, and once it starts, it will continue, and the entire horizon will fill with light. So that is when the sun is coming. The sun has not risen yet. The sun is approaching the horizon and it has not risen. So it's before the horizon, but the effects, the light is there and we can see it. And that is when the Fajr Salah starts. Once the sun comes up to the horizon and we can see, and it starts to rise, that is when the time for Fajr ends. So that is when the time for Fajr ends. Now, as I was doing this diagram, there is basically like a circle that happens, right? The sun will rotate in a circle, or the earth will rotate around the sun, right? But there's a circle that happens. And the astrologers have, or astronomers have calculated 360 degrees, right? You've probably heard of different degrees when they calculate the time for Fajr. And the majority of the scholars have said that the time for Fajr starts at the 18th degree, so meaning that there are 18 degrees before it reaches the horizon. And there's another opinion which says 15 degrees. However, that is a minority opinion amongst the scholars. The majority of the scholars of the contemporary scholars of our times and before say 18 degrees. So 18 degrees before it reaches the horizon is when the time for Fajr will start. وَمَنْ كَبَّرَ لِصَلَاةٍ قَبْلَ خُرُوجِ وَقْتِهَا فَقَدْ أَدْرَكَهَا. And whoever makes a takbir, so he says Allahu Akbar, before the ending of the prayer, so he makes before the ending of the prayer, فَقَدْ أَدْرَكَهَا, for he has caught the prayer. So for example, you're praying Dhuhr, and you say Allahu Akbar in the time of Dhuhr. And then by the time you go down for ruku, it's time for Asr. You have caught the prayer, you have caught the time of Dhuhr. Right? You have caught the time of Dhuhr. So as long as you say Allahu Akbar, you say the first takbir in that time, then you have caught the time. However, delaying it to the ending of the time is something haram, and a person should not delay their salah to the ending of the time. Right? وَالصَّلَاةُ فِي أَوَّلِ الْوَقْتِ أَفْضَلُ. And the salah in the beginning of the time is more preferable. إِلَّا الْعِشَاء الْأَخِيرَ, except for the night prayer, except for Isha. وَفِي شِدَّةِ الْحَرِّ فِي الظُّهْرِ. And when there is extreme heat for the Dhuhr prayer. So there are two salawat, Salat al-Isha and Salat al-Dhuhr. Salat al-Isha, it is recommended to pray it later on. It is recommended to pray it later on, as long as it is not before, it is not after the middle of the night. And for Dhuhr, it is recommended to pray it or to delay it if it is very hot. So in the time of the Prophet ﷺ, it would get very, very hot in the desert. And sometimes what they would do is they would delay the prayer of Dhuhr to not to the beginning of the time, but they would delay it a little bit until the sun moves a little bit, so it is not that much heat under them when they are praying. All the other salawat, it is preferable, it is mustahab to pray it at the beginning of the time. And that is the end of the of this shart, the shart or the condition of dukhul al-waqt. And we'll end off here, inshallah. Wa sallallahu ala nabiyyina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa ashabihi ajma'in.